Well, thank you all for attending our patch management behind the scenes session. We have some great topics of interest we're really looking forward to sharing with all of you. My name is Johnny Robinson. I'm a quality assurance engineer on the patch and a patch reviewer on Team Argonne, aka the patch team. With me, I have Sean Eberly, the patch curator. He's responsible for any and all application version updates, as well as definitions for the use in the patch management feature set. He would be speaking more today, but he conveniently lost his voice yesterday. Next to him is Bran Cohen. Bram is a client engineer who works with Team Argonne to test out specialized parts of patch management like the API and performance testing. All right, so this presentation, we're going to dive into some really interesting topics. I'm going to show the process in which we at Jamf receive the software updates, the process in which they are configured, tested, deployed, and what infrastructure is used. Bram is going to show us some of the behind-the-scenes patch processes, like the certificate signing of the JSON files, how Jamf Pro securely pulls said JSON files. And then after that, we're going to talk about how the Jamf Pro performs the patch calculations and take a look at database table structures. Lastly, we're going to talk about back-end networking of the patch management in regards to ports, URLs, services, followed by a Q&A session. All right, so Jamf's patch update process. We have a build job that runs a master script set on a schedule 24/7. It's pretty much the workhorse behind the automation process. We are locating third-party products and their software updates, comparing the artifacts to see if a new version has been released. We have a function that updates the existing JSON artifact to reflect the latest update. Then it creates a sub-branch with a pull request and then sends us a notification. The process I just listed, of which we have worked very hard on over the last few months, will continue to improve in functionality, which in return means getting you faster updates. In the meantime, this is where our 48-hour target response time starts. So this slide right here shows the time approximation through the update process. So you guys are probably wondering what in the world we're doing in these time slots. For every release, it has to go through a curator, the reviewer, and then the release manager who then pushes it out to production. I'll let you look at this for just a second. All right, so both the curator and the reviewer, we go through a series of tests. We verify things like the CF bundle short version string and the CF bundle identifier, because we all know those things never change, right? So does the update open on appropriate operating systems? Does it take down a system? And is it reporting the correct versions throughout Jamf Pro? Once we have verified these updates are legitimate, we post it into a series of AWS S3 buckets. After the reviewer, me, has completed the work, verifying that everything is okay, the update ticket is then passed to the release manager who pushes it to production, and everyone gets it on their JSS, Jamf Pro. Like I mentioned about the AWS buckets, we have a series of 3 of them. They are in place to ensure that the quality of patch, or to ensure the quality of the patch JSON files. Once the patch artifact moves from dev to staging servers, we sign the file with a build process code signing cert. It is a 2048-bit signed encrypted cert for those that are interested.
Not a list to compare?
A little too much right now, right? So now that we actually have updated the artifact and the signed staging server, all tested and approved by the curator and the reviewer, the release manager then approves the update and it goes to the third bucket, which is the production server. This URL right here, the jamf-patch, jamfcloud.com, that is live. If you go to it, you'll see the JSON files as they stand. Let's see if we can break it, right? All right. So all that in a nutshell is how Jamf is getting these updates to Jamf Pro Live without you having to click on anything. So now I'm going to pass this over to Bram. Bram will describe in detail what's going on under the hood of Jamf Pro and with patch updates.
Cool. Thanks, Johnny. All right. So as Johnny mentioned, the files, the definition is up on the production site. Every 5 minutes, the Jamf Pro will actually go out on the patch monitor and look for the software string Basically, it's looking for last modified string to see if any changes have been made to the production URL. Once that's done, it's actually validating the definition. We're looking into whether or not it's code sign. Right now, they're domain locked to the Jamf cloud, and we're checking for JSON is valid. As part of this, there's all kinds of error handling within the JSS, which, if anything occurs, like the certificate is bad, we'll get a full logging detail. In the event of a failure, no changes are made to the JSS. So when the update's received, we download it, parse it, validate it, and then we're actually dropping the entire existing software title, and then it's being reinserted. As part of this, we're dropping things like requirements, capabilities, anything that needs to be killed, extension attributes. Experts, you guys probably know, we do something like this for the Smart Groups API when you, or Groups API. When you post, we're actually dropping the entirety of the record and then re-adding it in. On extension attributes, however, they're maintained indefinitely. This is for the data integrity of the object, of the values within the database. So if we're reporting on one thing, one place, we want to continue reporting on that. However, if we need a new piece of data, we'll add another extension attribute to the JSS to ensure that we maintain those values. They're deduplicated if we have duplicate titles, if we have overlap, and they're uneditable, so we also maintain that integrity. As part of the adding a new EAA structure, the admins are notified of a new EAA that needs to be accepted before the new data set is occurred. When that occurs, then we are recalculating the patch queue. These objects, or this queue can be, happens in 3 places. They're timed events, the Jamf Pro monitor, inventory based on every device inventory. For instance, if an application changes its version outside of push, or user interaction if the patch title is changed in any way within the JSS by the admin. So what are these calculations? These calculations are smart groups, very common to everyone here. They're created directly from the invitation file, or the definition file. Very common things like application title is Firefox, application version is 4901. The only difference is that we have a number of them. Very small, very efficient, but there are a few. As part of the calculation, however, we also have things like capabilities. As you notice here, we have the greater than 10.6. We discovered early on that we'd need some way of rating or doing the greater than less than for these kind of calculations, and that's when it was added to 993. And then requirements. Our extension attributes is not. We're looking for very specific values, staying away from the like, which causes enormous load on the JSS. This also gives us capabilities that might not be foreseen yet, but we have, with extension attributes, this gives us a lot of range on what we can do in the future. So once we have the calculations, we add them to the patch queue. Patch queue is a giant list of devices, who has what version installed, and what's their max version capable. Here's a small snippet right here. We have individual patch titles, the devices that have that software title, what patch they currently have, and what's the max patch they can actually do. So if we have a range, like in the previous slide we have 10.6, there's some devices that are running 10.5. They would have a max patch that doesn't have a capability yet of reaching that next one. This all results in our pretty interface right now for the reports. Yeah, I like it. So we have a bunch of computers in here for a software title. Basically, this is all being calculated ahead of time when the calculation goes through for the patch queue. And then we're able to break them out by version based upon this very quickly. in very small sections, and then it all adds up to one beautiful sheet. So the actual action portion of the patch policy is, or a patch is patch policy. The calculations for who's eligible are already done because we have them in the patch queue. And then we can just go into refinement. Refinement is very similar to what you see right now in policy, targets, limitations, exclusions. So we take our existing patch queue as eligible, and then we can do additional refinement on top. Yeah. So the only difference here is that patch policy at the current moment, there is no modification unless the user selects it or the admin selects it. Upon that selection of a change, the calculation goes into effect for the patch policy, and then they are written, much like so. So when we go from 101 to 59, all those calculations will be redone again in order to have them on hand. These changes are written to a table called the patch policy status logs. And it's a giant list of every single software title with every single patch policy. They have overlapping scopes and titles, but the calculation gives us the ability to see who could do what, or who is in scope to do what, and we choose who's active. In the calculation, we have the highest version always wins. So if you scope 100, 101, and 100, 101 will always win. This table is kept up to date and indexed, so it's very quick when the client checks in. Quick example here. So this is a giant, giant list. I have multiple overlapping policies. Only one's in here that's going to win. We have attempt numbers, most recent settings, most recent runs, status codes, attempts, manual reruns if we choose that in the JSS, and importantly, ignored for. So that last column there, that ignored for tells us that if we have, let's say, 3 policies going to the same computer, this tells us which policy it's actually ignored for the previous one, or for the correct one. If we look in there, it's going to number 4. So this all comes into play on the client. We're at a new verb, Jamf patch. It is part of, it is its own verb. However, it actually runs as part of policy. So we get the recurring check-in. If you have that software title, it'll automatically begin doing the Jamf patch as part of policy. And because it is part of policy, we get that automatic recurring. Basically, when it checks in, it's checking the status logs for which policy is ignored for. And if we have a max attempts, if we're not at our max attempts, then go ahead and run the patch as long as it's set as automatic. Jamf patch is consistent with policy, in which case you can do the ID too. So if you want to target a particular patch policy and it's set up in scope, you can do it. Logging for the client, it is maintained per version. So if we have an execution, we change the version, the logs for the client will be wiped out within the scope of the patch policy. However, if we have failures within that versioning, we'll get them in line so you can see, okay, this one failed 3 times because of the same issue. That said, if you go down to the device level, they are part of the event logs, and event logs are stored indefinitely. So we'll have all logging for every patch ever done. I'll hand it back to Johnny here for some networking information.
Thank you, Bram. All right, so this is a slide for all the network administrators here. What we did here is we list what technologies contained in patch management require network connectivity, and where they are connecting to and over which port. I want to get in your guys' pictures here. So navigating to Jamf, to patch management in Jamf Pro, and clicking on New will display all available patch software titles. So the JSS receives this information from Jamf Nation, and it does so over port 443. Again, that link that we just talked about. So if we can't see it, that means either 443 is blocked or that URL is blacklisted somehow, some way. When the JSS receives definition updates, or when examining individual definitions through Jamf Pro, these JSON files are displayed through a 302 redirect from Amazon's CloudFront services. This is also over port 443. And there's an example URL right there. That's what it would look like. So the Jamf patch verb is pretty much identical to how like sudo Jamf policy would work. Still using 8443, and that's the default, or whatever port is manually configured, and some of those that have some complex setups. All right. That was pretty short and sweet, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions.
You're right, there are quite a few. Rich has been busy over there. All right, I'm just going to start from the bottom here. So as I mentioned before, if you have a question, tweet it out and we'll get to it. The first question is, are you incorporating existing open source tools into patch? If so, which open source solutions? Not at this time. He doesn't have a voice today, so I'll just go ahead and say it. Not at this time.
No, all in-house, all using existing frameworks, smart groups, extension attributes, the existing verb and communication. Only difference being that we're pulling in the information in bulk from a curated source into the JSS, and then it's from there setting it up inside.
Great. Next question, how are you obtaining version numbers as updates are released? Do you want to try it?
So,
the answer, you want to take it? Go ahead.
Yeah, the script is building, is taking down the information and then installing it, and then we're taking the version numbers from an actual install. Part of the reviewer's job then is to go back in and confirm that that is what is it being reported by a JSS actually installing the policy. So these are runs after runs after runs of upgrades, checking to see what the version number is.
Great. All right. Next question. Can you publish how you test individual updates? Cool. Yeah, this is probably going to be a question for product management, but it's something we'll look into. We'll make sure that gets followed up on in the discussion on Jamf Nation. All right. Why is the versioning information subject to a 48-hour hold?
Because it takes that long to run through the process. We hope to get better in the future. I think we're still a work in progress. But we want to confirm that the information that we're putting out there is not going to create a looping effect. And that's really the danger here, is that if we're reporting one and then the computers come back either lower or higher, it's possible that we could get a policy loop. And so we want to make sure that the patch that we're saying we're laying down, we're actually laying down.
Great. All right. Why are you signing the update? The reason I'm asking is that most updates should already have been signed by the vendor.
So we're actually signing the policy or the title definition. One of the things that we realized early was that if we're going to use extension attributes, there are scripts that are executing as admins or as root in some cases, all cases. And if we're going to be pushing out executable code that's going to hit out every client, we want to make sure that it's signed in a way that is not modifiable. So they are code signed, domain locked, coming from an SSL source.
Great. All right. Last rich one for a while. Are you repackaging the updates, and if so, why?
Right now, we're not doing any kind of package building. That will come in a future. Aaron kind of broached the subject a little bit, and we can probably talk later about that. But right now, we're just talking about definitions.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Some items use extension attributes because plugins are not collected by default. What if plugins are collected? Can we use that instead?
Yeah. I think we were looking for very specific version values. And I think that's why extension attributes was the way to go for that. It also gives us some more flexibility in case something else changes in the future that we need to identify. One example might be the Firefox ESR version. We had actually go into the bundle ID and get a different piece of information that we currently weren't reporting on in the JSS. So it was unforeseen, but already covered by our framework, because those are usually hard to identify, differentiate between a standard version and Firefox ESR install.
Great. Related question. Some tools require, or some software requires running command line tools in order to produce version info. Is that handled?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yep. Some software require running command line tools in order to produce the version info. Is that handled?
Currently not. We're using it could be covered, yes, because the extension attributes can pull anything from any command line.
Perfect. All right, we are into new ones, so give me 1 second while I read these. How much will all this patch management processing tax servers and clients, will it help more to augment RAM, CPU, or network? So do we need to start thinking about scaling up a server if you start to support patch?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I didn't really cover it. We are using quite a few smart groups to generate. And in our initial testing, we were just doing that, which was testing large amounts of devices, doing large amounts of check-ins. And yeah, there was some utilization with between mostly in queries. Whether that's better to do small ones versus large ones, that's a whole other thing too. Basically what we've done we've realized that there could be potential issues that if there are things going on with other services, there might be some overlap and overutilization of the connector pool. So we've limited ourselves down a little bit, and there'll be more tweaks here and there as we realize it. But we have some more performance tools now at our disposal, and I think we're good there. There's a queuing mechanism within the JSS now that I think should alleviate any kind of trouble that we'd run into. I forget what the end of the question was actually. That's where we're at. There's a queuing mechanism now in place and a limiter on the amount of threads that patch can actually run. So the only effect that you'd see would be the calculations. If you change something like a patch policy version, you'd get a recalculation. That calculation could be slower, but you won't see an overhead, a slowed down JSS experience. You just see a slower policy calculation. So you just wouldn't get an update until it's finished.
Perfect. All right, I just had one marked. In an earlier session, it was mentioned that you can force an update after X days. What happens then? Does it install that login window, self-service launch, or what happens?
Right now, and we're not done yet, but right now what it does is on the next Jamf policy execution, on like a recurring check-in, it'll run Jamf patch and install. So your same randomization happens up with that. Kill apps is a little bit different, where if it requires the application to be closed, there is a whole section for that we'll go further into. But happy path, it would be just next Jamf policy run after the time.
Cool. Is there a check involved that the PKG being installed is actually the patch release that you're scoping?
No, we do not validate PKGs at this point. We allow you to choose your own. If that causes errant behavior, we put in a max retry limit, so that if we have a policy that's going out and it keeps by default it's set at 3. So if there's 3 attempts, it'll just stop until it's manually overrode or the patch title is changed again.
Okay. Next question. Is the service proxy aware? So basically, are we going to be able to stick a JSS behind a proxy that can still reach the patch server?
Still reach the patch. Oh, for the Jamf Nation definitions. As far as I'm pretty sure. Maybe there's a clarification.
No clarification. That's one that
yeah,
we can tackle on Jamf Nation
Yeah, we can talk
afterwards
about
if
it
you need to
later.
look at it. It's fine.
Not entirely certain.
All right.
Who was it that said?
He's your gentleman right in front.
For the definitions?
We'll catch you afterwards.
Yeah. Sure.
All right. We'll make sure to follow up on that and put it on Jamf Nation. Is there any way to use this process for an initial app install? So I'm going to guess that means like rather than creating a regular policy, would you be able to subscribe to a new piece of software that doesn't exist yet? And will it perform that existing install, or will this just be for updates?
This will be just for updates. Currently, as part of the queuing mechanism, it's actually checking for the existence of the software title before it gets added to the eligibility for that software title. So it actually have to have the component piece before we start updating it.
All right. What would happen if an app developer incorrectly puts a version into info.plist and it does not match? Is that handled? If an app developer would put the wrong version into the info plist, what would happen in that situation?
Our testing should catch that.
Our testing should catch that. Okay, great.
So again, we're actually reporting it. So we're installing the patch itself and then reporting on what the JSS sees as the update. If we saw errant behavior, then we can actually report it back to the vendor, and hopefully they respond quickly to that. But yeah, we're actually going through the update process and then checking to ensure that what we're installing versus what we're seeing as part of reporting is exactly the same.
Great. All right, I think I've hit almost all of them. There are a few questions here that are more around the future state of patch. There's a different team that can answer those better, so I am marking those and we'll follow up with you accordingly. I'm not just ignoring you, I promise. But I will do one more refresh because I believe that was the last one that I saw. All right, looks like that's it. If you do want to chat any further, I believe these guys are going to be sticking around for a little bit.
Yeah.
If not, thank you for attending, and let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks, all.